evening. An insolvency company has revealed details of its clients who've gone bankrupt. The details show banks which had lent mortgages had to write off just under 70% of the outstanding debt. In all of the cases, the borrowers will lose or they have lost their homes. Our business editor David Murphy is here with me. These new details and figures, what do they tell us, David?
Well, I think the main thing that they tell us, Mary, is that bankruptcy for the banks involved is a pretty expensive process in the sense that, as you mentioned there, they are losing 70% of the money which they lent out by way of mortgages. So just to explain, these figures have been compiled by a company called Insolvency Resolution Service, which that acts as a personal insolvency practitioner to individuals who are in arrears. The figures are based on 25 cases which have been adjudicated bankrupt by the High Court this year. Now, that's not a very large number, so it's a small sample. However, if you take it in the context of the fact that there have been 164 bankruptcies in the first half of this year, it's a reasonable sample in that context. So we've got to bear in mind as well that people who end up in bankruptcy are the kind of worst case scenario. Some of these people will have applied for a different process called personal insolvency, and they will have been vetoed by the banks, which means their situation is really irretrievable. And I guess the interesting thing about it is it's the first analysis of the outcomes of people who have gone into bankruptcy. And some people would have assumed that perhaps they would have been able to hold on to their home, but in these cases, none of them have been able to hold on to the personal home. The other interesting aspect about it is that the unsecured lenders, so these would be credit card companies, credit unions, personal loans, all of that money is wiped out. Those lenders won't get a penny back.
All right. How much did you learn about the borrowers, their individual circumstances, what part of the country they come from and so on?
Well, these borrowers are from 12 counties around Ireland: Waterford, Wexford, Cork, Kilkenny, Offaly, Dublin, Donegal, Tipperary.
Financial difficulties are nationwide.
Yeah, I think that we can see that in almost most of the cases, the main difficulty was obviously with the mortgage, but some of them had quite a lot of other debt as well from a whole variety of companies. Among them were companies like Tesco, Flowgas, MBNA, Littlewoods, GE Electric is another one named, Heaton Buckley, AIB, Ulster Bank. The revenue crops up a good deal. Permanent TSB, MBNA. So there's a wide variety, and you can often see that some people don't just have difficulty with their mortgage, but they've difficulty with the unsecured debt like credit card, credit union.
I think that's something we've learned from Nolene Blackwell over and over again, that you find people in difficulty can have up to 20 different elements of debt when you take unsecured and secured debt into account. But the figures you got there, what's the average total borrowings?
Well, the average total borrowings in these cases are €368,000. So the figures haven't been skewed by one enormous borrower or anything like that. So generally the sums involved in terms of the mortgages, just to read out some of the figures: €133,000, €400,000, €186,000, €130,000, €220,000. So you can see that none of them are absolutely astronomical, and they're the kind of figures you would expect for ordinary people who've got into trouble with their ability to repay.
What else can we learn from these? As you said, they're a good representative sample. What's significant about them?
Well, I think the thing to remember about all of this is that what the government did when they set up the new regime to deal with personal debt is that they set up a system called the Personal Insolvency System, and this is where people are able to contribute something towards their debt, and if the lenders involved, if the people who lent them the money reduce some of the outstanding amount and the people are able to make a contribution towards that, then they can get through the whole system in the personal insolvency system. However, the banks have a veto on it because the creditors who are owed 65% of the debt can veto any personal insolvency regime. So people who can't get into personal insolvency or can't cut a deal with their banks informally by negotiating some sort of agreement, then they end up in bankruptcy. And what we have today is the outcome of 25 bankruptcies.
And will you just briefly remind us, because the regime has changed, how long are they in bankruptcy for?
Well, under the old regime, they were in bankruptcy for 12 years. Under this new regime, they're in bankruptcy for 3 years. But I guess it's tough for both sides. It's tough for the borrowers. These borrowers have lost their homes, and it's tough for the banks too, because they're losing 70% of the money they have lent out by way of mortgages. The unsecured creditors are getting nothing, so it isn't a pretty sight.
All right, David Murphy, thank you very much for that.
Drivetime on RTE Radio 1 with Danske Bank, the specialist bank.